Hey, it's Monday, February the 10th. And in the Wall Street Journal this morning, front page article on the White House budget hits safety net. And what it is it's expected today that President Trump will issue his budget proposal for 2021. It's supposedly the new fiscal year starts in October, so it needs to be approved prior to October the 1st. But normally what the article is suggesting will happen is that the Democrats will push it off and temporarily fund the government through December, at least to find out what the election results are, and maybe put the House and the Senate more favorable for the Democrats or the Republicans, whoever. What I found interesting, though, is how totally unrelated this is to our actual debt situation. And I would encourage you to go to this website, usdebtclock.org. I've been watching this for a number of years, and I'm appalled in saying that I started watching it, or the last I really thought a lot about it was in 2008, when our deficit was $8 trillion. It took us 200 years to get to $8 trillion. And then over the next 10 years, through the Obama administration and coming through the subprime crisis, that debt went from 8 trillion to 18 trillion. We finished 18 and started 19 at about 18 trillion, and now we're up to 23 trillion. And they're projecting in here, or Trump is, that they're gonna reduce the deficit, and basically through stimulation of the economy and the GDP, we're going to eliminate the deficit by, I believe the date was 2035. They're totally ignoring the fact that the biggest cost of running the federal government right now is in Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. Well, again, relating that to a video that I just did on the retirement crisis, and that is the baby boomers' retirement. The wave of the baby boomers are now qualifying for Social Security and now qualifying for Medicare, and some of them are going to be forced into Medicaid. So to assume that you're going to be able to cut the deficit spending and reduce our debt over that period of time is just totally ridiculous. In order to do that, your expenses are not going to go down. You're going to have to increase your revenues. Well, how do you increase your revenues? Well, again, if you look at the debt clock, you'll see the number one source of revenues are individual income taxes. Number two are our Social Security payments that we make as well as our employer makes, and that's the bulk of it. You probably, as I did, thought, well, corporate taxes make up a big. It's a fractional part of the United States income. So what I want to do is read this article and make your judgments for yourself, but also I want to show you my interpretation of the debt clock and give you some explanation. I can't explain it all to you. It's just too much there, and it's too complicated. But you should make it a favorite on your websites, and you should go to it, I would say, at least once a month, and just refresh your mind to what's happening for a couple of reasons. One is it's going to set the pace for our economy. It's an integral part of our economy, our debt and our service of the debt, and it's going to affect the stock market, and to a lot of my audience, their retirement. And another part of my audience, real estate agents, it's going to affect the real estate market because, again, we have an enormous amount of debt. I think it's if I remember the number, it's $16 trillion worth of debt wrapped up in mortgages. Well, that's all okay as long as the houses that secure those mortgages are worth more than the outstanding debt of the mortgage. And if I'm right, and this retirement crisis is right, I think the value of those houses is going to shrink dramatically over the next year to 3 years. And that's going to put a lot of people underwater. So whether you're a worker approaching retirement, someone in retirement, a real estate agent, or really whatever you do for a living, you need to be familiar with this debt clock. So I'm going to walk you through it. And but before I do that, I have a favor to ask you. I am in a race against time to get 1 million subscribers on my YouTube channel. The reason time is an issue is I'm 75 years old. So I'm going to ask you to subscribe to the channel and like the channel. Like the channel because what that does is it tells YouTube that people like it and they'll put it in front of more people, which will get me more subscriptions. So enough of that. Let's look at that debt clock and make you familiar with it. This is the website I was referring to. I've been aware of it since the early 2000s. I really started watching it when I was a financial advisor. And then I really started taking notice of it as we got into the subprime crisis. Back then in 2008, this number, this 23,271, was $8 trillion. Between 2008 and 2018, through basically printing of money, we have driven this up to, we drove it up in 10 years to 2018 to 18 trillion. And then since 2019, it's gone up to 23 trillion. And you can see it's climbing. I think the important thing to notice in this is how out of control our debt is and how there doesn't seem to be any concern that anything needs to be done about it. A functionality thing to point out, as you'll notice as I move this cursor from one number to the other, up here comes an explanation of each of the numbers, and I think that's going to help you come to understand this better. There's just so much information here that you're going to need all the help you can. Okay, let's look again at the national debt. Per citizen, this is your share of it. As a taxpayer, this is your share of it. Your children don't pay taxes, and your household, this might even be thought of as a household. So theoretically, Uncle Sam could show up at your door and say, write us a check for $188,054. That's your share of the national debt, and we want to pay it off. This is your federal spending. What cued me to come to this today is that I read that, I think I told you that Trump has just released a budget for $4.8 trillion. This is our federal spending. This tells you that's kind of what, it's kind of in line with what we're actually spending, the rate we're spending right now. So is this out of line? Well, currently we're spending relative to GDP, our gross national product, what we produce as a country. We're spending our debt, or not what we're spending, excuse me, our debt is 106% of that. If we go back to 2000, that was 59%. So you can see this has gotten way out of line from what historically was our debt to GDP ratio. Okay, now let's look and see what is the sources of our income. Well, federal taxes are by all means, but you can see we're spending 4.8 and we're collecting 3.5. That is not a good path to follow. As you can see, then per citizen, That's $10,600 per taxpayer, 28. This is kind of a revealing number as well. In 1900, our taxes to GDP was 3%, and over the years it's climbed to 2000. It was 19%, and now you see it dropped a bit. And that, I think, is probably due to Trump's tax cuts. We dropped our income to GDP, or our taxation to GDP has dropped 3%. For this $3.5 trillion of federal tax revenue, where is it coming from? Well, most of it's coming from you and I. 1.7 trillion is individual tax, then your payroll deduction, your employees or your employer's part of your Social Security, I guess it is, and your Social Security amounts to 1.259. This surprised me. Corporate taxes are a fraction of individual taxes, excise taxes, and the tariffs that they were talking about. Not that big of a deal when you look at it in total relevance. And then here's estate taxes. Again, not as big a number as you might have thought. Actually, estate taxes are less than tariffs. Now let's go over here and find out where we're spending this money that's creating this deficit. And the biggest part of it is Medicare and Medicaid. As you can see there, our health care for our senior citizen is way out of line. Social Security, again, the number 2, and then defense spending, and then this is interest on this debt, $378 billion. I want you to think about this. Historically, interest rates in the United States have been about 8%. Right now, this interest on debt is probably accumulating at a rate of about 1.5%. Think what this would do if we got back to historically high interest rates. Now you can see why the Fed is consistently pushing this interest rate down. If you think of the U.S. government as a business, and part of that business, the Federal Reserve, controls the interest rate that you're paying on this enormous amount of debt, of course you're going to push it down. We're going to get down to negative interest rates. And is that good for the citizenry? Certainly not for the retired part of the citizenry. But that's exactly what's actually happening. Here's federal pensions. We spend 28 or 29 billion. This is your senators, your congressmen, and your federal employees. And then this goes to subsidies to food and agriculture. And then this is an interesting number. This is waste and fraud. This is the federal government saying, hey, we know we got $138 billion of waste and fraud, but there's nothing we can do about it. Come on, hire me for that job. I'd like to dig into that. Then this category down here is for unfunded debt. In other words, these are the debts that we have no way of funding. So it is just going to continue to climb. One of the things that I thought was interesting, if you want, this is mortgage debt, $16 trillion. Is that right? Yeah, $16 trillion. That's okay as long as the houses that this debt is secured by are worth more than the debt. But as I said in my video of this weekend, that we are facing, or last week, a retirement crisis with the baby boomers, 79 million of us, selling our homes and we're all going to sell them at the same time. And the millennials are not in a position to buy them, so the value of those homes are going to come down as there are more sellers than there are buyers. What happens when the value of those homes go below the $16 trillion? They go underwater. And we've now got another real estate crisis. The average mortgage is $205,000. The average house being sold today in the United States is I think it's about $236,000. This is a shocking number, and this I lay totally on the baby boomer generation. This is student debt. Look at this, $37,000 per student in debt. We have just made college education too expensive. My own personal feeling is if we are educating people to benefit corporations, the corporations should be subsidizing this debt. If Google is the ultimate benefactor of a Stanford computer programming graduate, they should be subsidizing this student debt. Students shouldn't be coming out of school with that kind of debt. First of all, that makes it impossible for them to buy homes, to come in and take over the mortgage crisis that we've got coming at us. Then we've got credit card debt. This is, and again, in one of my videos recently, I explained how my grandfather never owned a credit card. I owned a credit card before my father did, because Wall Street created a credit society. Wall Street told me in 1969, I need to have everything that I want today when I want it, because my earnings are going to increase and I'm going to be able to afford it. Well, the reality is they aren't. You see these ads on TVs for lawyers who are telling you, yeah, you've gone out and spent more than you can ever pay. We'll get you out of it. Well, who do you think pays for the person who ends up not paying their credit card bill because some fancy lawyer got them out of it? You and I do. All this debt has to be paid. It's just transferred from one person to the other. Per house, per holder, per credit card holder, that amounts to $6.7 thousand. I don't have any credit card debt. None of my friends have credit card debt. So some of you got substantially larger than this. This is another interest. Debt to wealth ratio. This is, how does your debt compare to the amount of your wealth? Well, your debt surpasses your wealth $1,469 to 1. And this is basically showing there is a big part of our population that carries no debt, and there is a even larger part of our population that carries enormous debt. So there's a lot of information here. There's information about unfunded pensions. Here it is up here in states. This is why your states are going bankrupt. They have teachers' pensions. They have their legislature pensions that are totally unfunded. And as we go further down this pipe, your states are going to be pushed further and further into bankruptcy, and nobody seems to be addressing it. It used to be talking about, are you going to leave this debt to your children and your grandchildren? Well, we're far beyond that. This is our great-great-great-grandchildren, and something has to happen to bring this all into balance. And I'm afraid it's a collapse of our economy, and we have to reset. And that is that our assets are going to lose 50% of their value. We're going to go through a recession, depression time, and this all has to be reset. The other hope I think there is to get us baby boomers out of Congress. You can see they are totally irresponsible. You couldn't run your household this way. They have made it impossible for the following generations to have any kind of lifestyle. Student debt at $1.6 trillion per student, 30s. And again, you know that there are some students that don't have any. I met a doctor, a young doctor who has over $200,000 worth of medical debt. And his income isn't coming anywhere near his ability to pay it. So this has to all reset. And I'm urging you to put usdebtclock.org in your favorites, and at least once a week, go and educate yourself here so that you know, or you have a better handle on what's going to happen in our country and the needs that we have. We got a presidential election coming up. I don't know. I don't want to get into that, but some of them just want to just keep driving this up, and the others, well, they all want to just push the debt to wherever it is. Okay, I thought this was important, and I wanted to share it with you.